Hello, everybody. Welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on today's episode, I am very excited to welcome Bill Holter to the program, an expert in the precious metals space, a contributor to the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and a former writer for Miles Franklin. We are going to dive into the rapidly escalating conflict between Israel and Iran and the question of the U.S. joining the fray as Trump has warned residents of Tehran to evacuate. Are we on the precipice of a major war involving the U.S., and what would that mean for the current world order? We're also going to cover Russia-Ukraine and Zelensky's pleas for Donald Trump to impose more sanctions on Russia. Will the U.S. play ball, or will they turn their back on Ukraine in favor of their operations with Israel? We're also going to discuss how all of this madness could affect safe haven demand for gold and silver, and so much more. Before we dive in today, Commodity Culture now has merchandise, hats, mugs, t-shirts, and hoodies available, all backed by a 100% quality guarantee. Find them in the description below. And now, my friends, strap yourselves in for my conversation with Bill Holter. Bill Holter, great to have you back on Commodity Culture. I want to start with the rapidly escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. Israel's attack seemed unprovoked, especially as the U.S. was in the middle of negotiations with Iran over their nuclear program, and yet a ton of politicians, from prominent GOP members to even Pierre Poilievre, the Canadian Conservative leader, down to President Trump himself, seemed to be saying the attack was completely justified and somehow Israel was just defending itself. I wonder what you make of the situation at present.
Well, first off, it was the attack was done, a day or 2 days before Sunday's scheduled peace talks. So from that standpoint, you could look at it as a Pearl Harbor. If you look at, you got to look at the reasoning behind what's happened. Iran was on the list, and this list goes back to the year 2000, 2001, where they had, I forget all of them. I think it was Yemen, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya. That was a hit list, and Iran is, one of the remaining on the hit list. You could also look at it from the standpoint of liquidity's getting tight, and historically, the way to ramp up an economy is to go to war. So, now you've got the military-industrial complex is going to be fed again.
Yeah, certainly interesting times. I wonder what your thoughts are on the U.S. getting dragged into this, because we've now seen, Trump left the G7 meeting in Canada early, said something big is happening, but it's not a ceasefire. He's advised residents of Tehran to evacuate. Do you think a U.S. strike on Iran is imminent? And from the perspective of the U.S. government and the deep state, could they use, you mentioned that war is a great way to boost an economy. Do you think they could use this for that purpose, and also just to distract from all the other domestic issues that the U.S. currently has?
I think you just used the word distract, and I think that's an important word. Do I think the U.S. is going to join in this? I certainly hope we do not, but it looks pretty imminent. I mean, what did we do? We've sent refueling aircraft to that region. We're relocating naval assets. To me, it looks like the U.S. will join.
And what is the ultimate outcome here for Israel? Because from a lot of people that I've listened to in terms of, geopolitical experts, I had Alex Craner on the show recently to discuss this as well. It feels like Israel operating on its own, this was a rather brazen move to this attack on Iran. However, with the support of the United States, it kind of fortifies their position and makes it possible for them to carry out a longer, protracted conflict. We have seen Iran strike back, hitting Tel Aviv. We don't know the actual extent of the damage yet. From Israel's perspective, what do you think is their end game?
That's hard to say, but I don't. You'd have to be actually in the backroom discussions to know whether or not Israel acted on their own or not. My biggest concern is that Russia jumps into this, and understand that Iran is a major supplier of oil to China. And they've just signed a bunch of, over the last year, they've signed a whole bunch of trade deals guaranteeing them X amount of oil. Is that oil going to even be produced after the smoke clears? So, I mean, the danger is that Russia gets involved, China gets involved. You're talking about a world war.
And now a quick break to hear from our sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium owner Ian Everard is considered one of the most honest and level-headed gold and silver dealers in the United States, praised even by his competitors. So give him a call today to take advantage of the specials right now. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, mint fresh, only $2.47 over spot. Mint fresh silver maple leafs 2025 coins, 1 ounce, $2.87 over spot. While supplies last. Reach out today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. You mentioned oil there. Do you think we could see, we already did see a jump in WTI crude prices after this conflict began. Then they dropped somewhat on hopes. I think the Wall Street Journal released an article saying, oh, Iran wants peace. And then Iran was saying, we didn't say anything like that. The time for negotiations seems at this point to be past. It looks like Israel is targeting some of Iran's oil production. Normally, when oil prices rise on these sorts of headlines, wars, geopolitical news, it tends to drop back down again. Do you think this time could be different and we might see a more sustained rise in the oil price if this conflict continues?
Well, yeah, as of this morning, it's different. We've already had 2 tankers in the Strait of Hormuz that collided. You've got one that's on fire. I don't know the likelihood of it sinking, but obviously that would be an ecological disaster. But if you start plugging up the Strait of Hormuz and that's not able to be used, that's 20% of all the oil that's transported worldwide. So, I mean, that's, you're putting a crimp in supply right there. I mean, if this does go hot, it's already hot, but if the U.S. does join in, if Russia follows, if China follows, I've seen numbers of $130 oil. I think it's plausible you could see $300 oil, depending upon, what happens to the infrastructure of Iran producing oil. Does anything would anything flow through the Strait of Hormuz? Probably not. So you really can't put a number on where oil is going to go. But like I said, if we see this expand into a worldwide conflict, the price of oil is going to go stratospheric.
If the price of oil does go up to these levels you're talking about, won't that run completely counter to Trump's promise to bring oil prices down, bring prices down at the pump? That's kind of been one of his big wins that he's been brandying about on social media and in interviews, that gas prices are down. I mean, could we see a situation similar to the oil embargo of the 1970s in the U.S. with lineups at the pump and astronomical gas prices? And what would that do for the Trump administration politically?
Yeah, of course you could see that. But super high oil prices, I mean, now you're talking about inflation. I mean, that's inflationary. It's obviously a big tax on each individual that drives, because now they're spending more money to get from point A to point B. I think you got to look at it and just understand that if this expands, there are no good bullet points whatsoever.
And in terms of the nuclear weapons accusation coming from both Israel and coming from the Trump administration. This talk in the news. Now we've just seen Fox News release a piece where we now have satellite GPS data that shows a huge nuclear facility in Iran. Very interesting timing, right as it feels like the US is ramping up to potentially attack, that Fox News would release this information, a very pro-Trump news organization. Do you think this is another, Bush era weapons of mass destruction type of, fabrication? Is Iran actually that close to producing nuclear weapons? What are your thoughts?
I would just say that the first casualty of war is truth. And I just posted last night Tulsi Gabbard testifying in front of Congress. I think it was March 25th or whatever, that that they did not have intelligence that Iran was close to a nuclear weapon or even trying to build nuclear weapons. So, who's telling the truth? Was she lying? Was she, ill-informed? I don't know, but I think it's pretty convenient to come out and say that, Iran's just a few days away from a nuclear weapon and Israel launches.
Yeah, and Benjamin Netanyahu has been accusing Iran of being about to build a nuclear weapon for a very long time. I think it's back to the 90s. So that this does not seem a super plausible reason to be attacking the country. I wonder what your opinion is on the potential of a false flag being instigated to get the American people behind the war, whether that's, some attack, supposed attack on military personnel, American military personnel, whether that's a base abroad, whether that's an aircraft carrier or something like this, to then get the American public potentially behind the war. Do you think they could orchestrate something like that?
Yeah, I do. And I think the answer to your question is probably 99.9% chance that there is a false flag somewhere. I mean, obviously, there's a chance that that doesn't happen. But I think it's extremely likely that it will happen. And I can almost guarantee you that the false flag will not be a carrier going down. Can you imagine what markets would do? Can you imagine what the dollar would do if it was shown that the U.S. is not the biggest, baddest bully on the block any longer?
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Let me add to that. I mentioned the dollar. Let's look at treasuries. What happens to treasury auctions? Do you have the safe haven flight of capital coming to the U.S. or going somewhere else? And that somewhere else most likely would be gold and silver or other hard assets. I under the scenario of a carrier going down, the treasury market would be in total convulsions. The dollar would probably take a 5% hit. I don't see that scenario happening, but nothing's off the table.
I want to touch on the war between Russia and Ukraine because that also continues to escalate, with reports of Russia capturing several additional villages, attacks on Kiev with drones. Zelenskyy has taken to X to do what he does best: demand more sanctions from the West. He wrote, "No one has been able to stop Putin. Only Trump remains. He might be able to. But to stop Putin, one thing is essential. He must lose money. Only then will he be unable to expand his army and military sector." Now, I think so far we're on the 17th sanctions package on Russia, and yet their economy has yet to collapse. What are your thoughts on Zelenskyy's kind of begging and groveling for Trump to do something here and the trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Yeah, I don't know how you're going to make Russia, lose income. This thing escalates, the price of oil is going to go higher, and that's their biggest. They produce oil. That's their biggest production asset. So, higher oil prices is going to actually add money to Russia. And I would remind people that Russia is probably the most solvent nation on the planet. They've only got 17% debt to GDP. The U.S. is 130% debt to GDP. Japan's over 300% debt to GDP. The West it's an insolvent bankruptcy waiting to happen. So I don't think from a financial standpoint, I don't see any way really that you're going to be able to hamstring Russia. And don't forget, they've been accumulating gold. Look at the gold chart from October of, I think it was 2022, and it was the day after the U.S. sequestered $300 billion of Russian reserves, of Russian U.S. Treasury reserves. Those were basically stolen. And from that day forward, that marked the absolute bottom for gold. So you've got Russia that's been accumulating gold. We know China is the biggest holder of gold worldwide. I mean, forget about the official statistics. The official numbers are a complete joke. If you look at the onshoring, importing of gold by China over the last 10, 15 years, they have a minimum 25,000 metric tons, and we have a very, I'm not sure what word I want to use here, we have a very suspect 8,300 tons. Do we really have that? There's not been an audit since 1956. It's highly doubtful. And I mean, just go back to the old saying, and it makes total sense. He who has the gold, read money. He who has the gold makes the rules. And unfortunately, I mean, I hate to see this because I mean, I'm an American, I'm pro-American, but we are failing. We are a failing empire.
And I want to move on to gold and silver safe haven demand and talk a little bit about the failing American empire in a moment. But first, I just want to ask you, when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, do you think we are completely beyond the point of negotiations now? Because prior to Ukraine launching this big drone attack on nuclear-capable Russian aircraft, they attacked a rail line, which was condemned as a terrorist attack by Putin. Before that, they were meeting in Istanbul to try to hash something out. Do you think we're completely beyond that point now? And how do you expect that conflict to come to a close?
Yes, I do believe we're beyond that. And I would ask, why would Russia negotiate anything that's other than 100% in their favor? They've basically won. And they've bled the West. They've bled the West financially. More importantly, they bled the United States of munitions. I mean, the munitions we sent over the last couple of years to Ukraine, has all of that been replaced? I don't think so. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I highly doubt it. Oh, and one other thing I want to mention, few people even remember this, but where is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve for the United States? It was rock bottom at the end of Biden's tenure back in January, and I haven't heard any reports. I mean, maybe it's happened, but I haven't seen it. But I've not read any reports at all that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve has begun to be filled.
Yeah, that I haven't either. Now that you mention it, I want to touch on Trump's term here so far, because he was supposed to be a peacetime president who was going to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict, keep the U.S. out of further war. I was actually cautiously optimistic when he first got elected, but now it feels to me like his administration, first of all, it seems abundantly clear they were involved in Israel's attacks on Iran. His policy towards the war in Ukraine has been completely confusing and unfocused. He's saying, I'm going to sanction Ukraine, I'm going to sanction Russia. They should agree. Putin's terrible. Zelensky's just going back and forth constantly. Am I missing something? Is the president playing 4D chess here, or is it as bad as it looks?
If he's playing 4D chess or 5D chess, it's way over my head because I don't see that.
Yeah. And so what is your assessment so far of Trump's term, both the good and the bad? Do you think there some positives have come out of it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest positive is the border and the deportations. I mean, yeah, you've got a lot of people that argue that, but me personally, I think that's excellent. I think the business dealings that he's done, like the crypto stuff that he did 2 days before the inauguration, the now it's, what is it, Trump telephone, the he's going to run it through AT&T or whatever. I just think it's all a bad look. I questioned the first day I heard it about the anti-Semitism laws that they want to put into place, where if you say anything bad about Israel, you go to jail. Well, what about the First Amendment? I mean, the First Amendment is supposed to be ironclad law in the United States with no exceptions. And what are they doing here? Oh, yeah, there's a First Amendment unless you talk about Israel badly. I think that's really bad. I also think that the timing of the Israeli attack a day or 2 days before the peace negotiations that were going to be held on Sunday. I mean, it's not only a bad look. That's just plain bad. That's like somebody punching you in the head while they're shaking your hand at the same time. That's Pearl Harbor stuff.
How much influence do you think Israel does have in America? Because from everything I can see, it seems like their influence is absolutely massive, and they tend to have the final say on what America does, particularly in regards to anything that Israel's involved in. Of course, we all know about Jeffrey Epstein. Where is that list? I mean, a lot of speculation there that he was connected to the Mossad, and was an agent. So what's going on here? Because it seems like they have completely infiltrated American politics. Am I off base there?
I'll just give you a rough statistic. I think there's 30, it's just under that, it's in the high 20s, Republican senators / congressmen that are not members of AIPAC. I think the number is 60 or 70 Democrats that are not members of AIPAC. The rest, the vast majority, call it, it's over 300. 300 senators, representatives. I mean, they're funded by AIPAC. I think that tells you the whole story right there.
Yeah, show me the incentive and I will show you the outcome, as Charlie Munger said. Let's talk about safe haven demand for gold being driven by all of this geopolitical conflict. Obviously, gold, we all know the story. It recently almost hit all-time highs again, has put in a fantastic performance. I think it's gone pretty much straight up since around the end of 2023. And all the ingredients are in place. What are your current thoughts on the gold market and how all of this geopolitical turmoil could potentially affect it?
Well, the price of gold has gone higher from an institutional standpoint. You've got institutional buying, you've got hedge fund buying. Most importantly, you have central bank around the world buying. Oddly, and I mean, you couldn't have told me this scenario 2 years ago, 5, 10, 20 years ago, that the world would be on the verge of World War III. And the public would be selling gold. They're selling gold. They're selling silver. And I've seen more sales in the last 6 to 9 months, just in my own personal book, in the last 9 months, I've seen more selling than I've seen collectively in the last 15 years. That tells me that there's no money on the streets. That tells me people, the average person, is running low on funds and selling assets. And of course, what asset are you going to sell? Something that doubled or something that's down in value? So you've seen gold, you've seen silver from a retail standpoint has been sold to raise capital, but from a central bank standpoint, they're unloading it left and right. Oh, and one other thing, Jesse, I want to mention that. And I started talking about this probably 10 years ago. It seems to me that, obviously paying the debt back is mathematically not possible. There's no way you could pay the debt back in current dollars. And I said all along that there would be a point in time where they would kick the table over. And they kick the table over because they know that they can't hold the system up any longer. So they start a war, some type of false flag, whatever. They kick the table over and they say, well, our policies were were sound, our policies were working, except for, this or that or whatever. And they'll have something to point at to blame rather than the structure of the system.
Yeah, what do you think it's going to take for people to ever wake up and realize that the government is their enemy? It always blows my mind when I see, my team versus your team mentality out there, and it's gotten so crazy that now it's like whatever my team does is good. They'll justify anything. Whatever your team does is your team could be trying to cure cancer, but we're going to fight against that and try to stop it because that's not what my team is doing. People are consumed by this, and I think social media accelerates it. Do you think, as humanity, we're ever going to wake up and look at the people, the masters that are making us slaves, and revolt, or at least realize that they're the enemy at large?
Yeah, that's a pretty easy one. People don't wake up until it affects them personally. I mean, if people woke up and in a week's time realize they've got 25% less capital than they had the week before, that affects them. They go into the grocery store and there's no cans of tuna fish to buy. That affects them. We have a real estate. We've already had commercial real estate has already begun a humongous collapse. Not so in the housing market. The housing market, the only thing that's happened is the volume is dried up. The volume now is about 50% of what it was a couple of years ago as far as sales, as far as closings. The next thing will be price drops. That affects people mentally. And it affects them financially, but more so mentally. If you think your house is worth 2/3 or 3/4 of what it was. So my answer to that is basically no, nobody's going to wake up until it affects them personally.
I want to touch on silver here for a moment because it has been trading over $36 fairly consistently here. How do you currently view the setup for silver, and what are the catalysts that could potentially take us back to all-time highs and potentially beyond? I mean, if we even go back to 2011 to get back to that level, we'd need to be in triple-digit silver here.
Yeah, there's all kinds of potential events. I think the event or the response to events is that we see a failure to deliver, because there's so many paper contracts out there per real deliverable ounce that it's a certainty that there will be a failure to deliver. That failure to deliver, I mean, you're talking about triple digit silver with maybe a fair sized number in front of it. $400, $500, $600, who knows? You just have to understand that the price of silver has been suppressed for so many years with naked paper contracts, and the game just kept going and going. It could have easily been blown up by Russia, could have easily been blown up by China, but that would be an act of war. And they basically left us to our own methods of destruction, of destroying ourselves. And that failure to deliver is going to happen. And when that happens, it's going to set a time bomb of derivatives defaulting off. I mean, that will be the end of the financialization of the West.
Yeah, you're echoing some sentiments that Ed Steer said recently when I interviewed him. He said he's seeing signs that the paper manipulation of gold and silver prices through the futures market is starting to become untenable for the shorts. Do you also see the dam breaking up ahead in the way that you described? And what would that mean for precious metals prices, both gold and silver?
Oh, I mean, you can't forecast a price if there's no supply. I mean, it will end in a failure to deliver. And look at the price of gold, look at the price of silver, much, much higher than they were 6 months, a year ago. And all of those shorts are underwater now. All the shorts in silver are underwater. All the shorts in gold are underwater, which means they've got to be meeting margin calls. And okay, so the money gets printed up and maybe even lent to the shorts, but it's not going to make any difference, because at some point in time, the herd will move in unison and say, I want my metal. I don't trust a paper contract. My late partner, Jim Sinclair, used to always say, what's the value? What is the value of a contract that cannot perform? And the answer is zero. And if you're zeroing out contracts, I mean, he was talking about, you could see COMEX gold, $10 offered, $10 offered, no bids. And you could see it in the cash market, $50,000 bid and no offers. And that illustrates the value of a contract that cannot perform. It's worth zero. But that's going to bleed over to the entire derivatives complex. I mean, what does that mean for oil contracts? What does that mean for rice? What does that mean for wheat, orange juice, et cetera, et cetera? It's going to push the world more or backwards toward cash and carry trade, as opposed to the financialization where paper contracts can push the price of an asset around to fit whatever the current narrative is.
And looking outside of the gold and silver space, given the current geopolitical and economic realities in the world, is there anywhere else you think that presents value potentially in the commodities sector, things like copper, things like oil and gas, uranium, or any other assets that you think could outperform up ahead?
Yeah, there are. I'm not going to name any. I would just say that gold and silver are money. And historically, when the shit hits the fan, you want to be in cash. In the old days, 100 years ago, cash meant dollar bills or a currency that was backed by gold or exchangeable for gold. That's no longer the case. Going to gold, going to silver is going to cash. And that's what you do before recessions, before World War III, whatever. You know, if you're trying to hide, you're trying to find a safe haven, gold and silver are the ultimate because they cannot bankrupt.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line, is they can't bankrupt in a world that is bankrupting.
Well, speaking of bankrupting, I want to hone in on U.S. debt levels for a moment, because the Trump administration was supposedly going to cut spending and try to bring the budget under control with Doge and Elon Musk and that whole movement. But it appears no such thing is really going on. The military budget is set to increase to over $1 trillion in 2026. That's a 13% jump. The Treasury needs to refinance $9 trillion and issue $2.5 trillion in new debt this year. The big, beautiful bill is full of wasteful government spending. They're going to have to just print their way out of this, or try to do so. What is the end result? Could we actually see hyperinflation in a country like the United States?
Oh, we will see hyperinflation. You're going to see, and I've talked about this for at least 10 years, that we would see deflation of the things we already have and inflation of the things we need to live. It's a certainty that the dollar will lose value from here, because the interest doesn't exist to pay. So they're going to have to, I mean, we're going basically to the definition of how the system works. When money's borrowed, the interest doesn't exist, so that interest has to be printed or created. I think the bottom line is there cannot ever be a real cut in spending, because you can never shut the new flow of funds off to a Ponzi scheme. And this whole system, the whole fractional reserve system, is a Ponzi scheme by definition. And you can't shut new money off. If you do, the old money that's already invested withers up, dries up, and dies.
So how can people prepare themselves for that sort of scenario? Obviously, putting yourself in gold and silver, stocking up on food and water, doing these type of things. Is there anything else, or anything that comes to mind for your average person out there who's listening, who's concerned about the future in the U.S. and many other Western countries?
Yeah, I feel like a broken record. I mean, every interview I've done for the last, 3 or 4 months, everybody asks the same question. So what do you do? The bottom line is you've got to prepare to protect yourself. You've got to prepare in the way of having food, clean water, energy if you can. You need to be in a location where, you don't have a hundred neighbors within 50 yards of you. You need to be in a rural situation where you can protect your position. How do you protect your position? You need arms. You need ammunition. You need to try to get yourself in the most self-sufficient position that you could be in, because you're going to dial 911 and nobody's going to answer uh, for a spell. Is it going to be 2 weeks, 2 months, God forbid 6 months or more? If we go 6 months or more where the system is down, where banks aren't open, you can't go to Walmart because there's nothing there, it's closed. You're going to see a lot of people die. I mean, the knowledge of how to survive off the land now no longer exists. If you go back to the Great Depression, what was it, like 80% of America were still had the tech, or had the knowledge of how to farm, how to feed themselves. That knowledge now is what, 5%, 7% of the country.
So you want to be one of those 5 or 7%.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you don't know, or you're in an area where you can't farm, make sure you got a lot of canned food. Make sure you got a lot of the 25-year storage food. And most importantly, make sure you have the ability to clean water. Make sure you've got a filtration system, because you're going to go through, a lot of water. I mean, even if if you have the 25-year survival food, that's not worth anything unless you got water to mix with it. I do want to mention, on my website, there is a icon up top called Grizzly's Corner, and that's a contributor, a really good friend of mine, who's written, I don't know, a dozen or more articles regarding prepping. And I guarantee you, every single article that you read, you're going to pick up at least 1, 2, 3 ideas. You read through all of it and you implement what he suggests, you're going to be far better off.
Great. I will put a link in the description below to billholter.com so people can check that out. Final question. The risks in Western countries do seem to be rising, as we've been talking about, the civil unrest picking up, medical systems in previously high-tier countries like Canada and the UK in absolute shambles. In my home country of Canada, unless you're about to die, you're waiting 6 months, a year for surgeries and different things like that. The cost of living becoming unmanageable, the crackdown on free speech by the government, crime on the rise. All of this seems to be converging. I listened to a podcast recently with a professor called David Betts, and he said he studies civil wars throughout history. And he was saying that in the UK, at least where he's located, but he also believes this situation is the same in many other Western countries, that civil war is all but inevitable, according to the studies he's done on past civil wars and how he sees things moving forward. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that risk exists in the U.S. today and other Western countries?
Oh yeah, I do. Look, I do absolutely believe that it's by design, if you will. And yeah, in the U.S., I mean, look everywhere. All you're seeing is division. And if you cut a pie in half, you got 2 pieces. If you put another slice, now you got 4. Every time they divide the population in half, or 60-40, whatever, every time they put a slice in the pie, something that's divisive, they're dividing the country. Well, what is the Chinese proverb? Divide and conquer. And that's what's happening, is these populations are going to end up exploding on each other. And again, I believe it's by design.
So I know I said that was the last question, but what is the end goal of those who have designed this collapse? What's their agenda?
I just have to believe this is good versus evil. It's God versus Satan, and Satan wants nothing but chaos.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I have been going down that rabbit hole. I think the only way to explain a lot of the actions of the people in charge is that they are literally evil and enjoy inflicting suffering and destruction on others. I've gone down the satanic rabbit hole a little bit too. Really interesting. And I tend to align with your views there. Well, Bill, fantastic conversation. Tell us about BillHolter.com and anywhere else people can engage with you online. If there's anywhere else they can go, let us know.
Yeah, you can go to my website, BillHolter.com. Basically, what I've been doing is printing or putting out articles of interest, comments to that. I've got a couple guys that do write on a fairly regular basis. There is a contact button on there if you want to reach me. You can go through that, or if you're looking at, because I do work as a precious metals broker. If you want to reach me directly, my email is bholter@proton.me.
Great. I will put all of that in the description below as well.
And don't forget to go to Grizzly's Corner. There's a lot of good stuff there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Bill. It's been a blast. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you for joining us today. This episode is brought to you by ARC, Silver, Gold, Osmium. Take advantage of their specials today. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, only $2.47 over spot. Silver Maple Leaf 2025 1-ounce coins, only $2.87 over spot while supplies last. Reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you also. Pick up your hat, t-shirt, mug, or hoodie, Commodity Culture style, using the link in the description below. Backed by a 100% quality guarantee, my friends. I will see you in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.